Good afternoon and welcome to another episode of the Bookum Show. My name is Kyle Colley and this is a special episode of Founders Talk Podcast, a podcast for founders to tell their stories, ideas, and visions of the future. This episode is brought to you by Bookum, the book community's new and best way to host dynamic online book clubs. Download the app and start your book club today at www.bookumapp.com. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe to our channel. My guest today is the exceptional Rachelle Gardner. Rachelle is the president of Gardner Literary Agency. As a literary agent since 2007, Rachelle has negotiated over 300 contracts with more than 20 publishers and has worked with more than 200 authors to bring their books to publication. Additionally, she has been in publishing since 1995. She is a literary agent, a leader, a helper, a reader, a writer, a hiker, a bike rider, and loves working at the foot of the Rocky Mountains in Colorado. Rachelle, welcome to the Founders Talk Podcast.
Thank you so much, Kyle. Appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. I would love to start kind of just growing up. What moments or books shaped your life and have led to the work that you do today?
So I was a reader from a very young age, but when I was 9 years old, I broke my arm, and so I couldn't go out and skate or ride bikes with my friends. So I stayed inside reading books. In fact, I have this old snapshot of me sitting on my bed with my arm in a sling and a book in my other hand. It was a Judy Blume book, and it felt like a revelation. It was my first Judy Blume book, and it was so honest and real and refreshing. And I thought at that time, people can really write these things in books. This is amazing. And I was hooked, and I have never been without a book since.
I love that story. It's so honest and just so, I think so many people can probably relate to that moment. I've known a lot of people that have kind of been led to books through, personal injuries and have kind of shaped their life from there. Were there any other books you remember growing up that really shaped your worldview or just anything in general?
I mean, once I was that age, which was pretty young, I just started reading everything. And I remember certain kind of classics like The Island of the Blue Dolphins, and then the Roald Dahl books like James and the Giant Peach. But really, I was just reading everything I could get my hands on. I would just literally come home from the library with big stacks of books, and I just read everything.
I always admire people that were big readers growing up. I always kind of struggled with reading. I remember it was something that was kind of tough. And then only later in life did I really become super passionate. And then I started devouring every book I can get. So I'm always interested when people have at a young age or really found their love for reading at such a young age. But to that point, do you remember the first book or book deal or publishing project you ever worked on or made you fall in love with being a literary agent?
Oh, in 2009, I received a book proposal from a brand new writer named Rachelle Evans. And when I read it, I had that same feeling I had when I read Judy Blume as a child, although this was nonfiction, but the authenticity was breathtaking, and her ability to say what I was thinking but never said blew me away. And I thought, this right here is what I want to read and what I want to say in the world, what I want to work with. Rachelle had such an incredible voice, and her writing was so strong, and her honest questions about the church and the culture that she grew up in were powerful and just really resonated with me. And I felt like I had an opportunity as an agent to really help bring important writers and books into the world and to advocate for writers that others might overlook. And that just kind of really cemented my path.
That makes a lot of sense. And was that the first book that made you strike out on your own to start Gardner Literary, or how did you kind of start that for yourself?
No, I was working for another agency. So I worked for other agencies for over a decade before I started my own agency.
Okay. And just to take a step back, for those that are curious or want to learn or are interested in being a literary agent, can you kind of explain what a literary agent does and kind of how people can understand that for those that are unfamiliar?
So an agent is the author's advocate and representative when it comes to the relationship with the publisher. So agents not only find the publishing partner for the author, sell their book to a publisher, but they negotiate the deal. They review the contract and negotiate all the contract points, and then they're there for the author throughout the publishing journey. And there's just always a lot of things that come up. We're in a lot of meetings together with the publisher. So we're just always there for the author so that you as an author are just not alone in this journey. You have an advocate by your side who understands publishing, knows what the publisher is up to, can help you understand, and can always step in to be your advocate whenever needed.
Yeah, and so does that look like building out a client list so that you kind of have those? I know you worked in publishing since 1995, so I'm sure you just have had built these relationships over time. But if someone wanted to get into being a literary agent now, what kind of steps are you taking to, put yourself in the best position to be successful in this craft?
You don't need any sort of credential, but it's best if you do have a number of years in the publishing business. So the best preparation is working within a publisher or maybe as an assistant at a literary agency so that you are actually learning the business of publishing. Because as an agent, you are very involved in the business of publishing, and you really need to understand how it works. Some agents come to it having been traditionally published authors, and so they've worked with an agent and worked with their publisher for years, and they may come into an agency where they're going to be mentored. So either way, it's best if you start in an agency where you're going to receive training and mentorship, because there's a lot more to it than it appears on the outside.
Yeah, I imagine it's yeah. Because I understand like from writers, they always talk about going through, and we'll talk a little bit about it, like doing the Kyrian letter and making sure they find the right agent, and that's something that is a lot of stress for a lot of authors. But from your side of things, how often or how many books are at any given time are kind of coming to your table and that you're working on to help them get to the next part of publishing?
Well, at any given time, I usually have 50 to 60 active clients who are by active, I mean we're doing things, we're either on submission or we've just got a publishing deal, we're doing contracts, or their book is somewhere in the publishing pipeline. So and then we bring in people kind of very slowly, maybe one a month or something. So we add people in as we find them.
Now, it makes a lot of sense. And then once they get the deal, are you still kind of working with them all the way through release, or is there a handoff at any given point, or you walk with them the whole way through publishing and the marketing part of it afterwards?
Yeah, we work with them the whole way through, and especially because so especially for nonfiction, after you sign a publishing contract, you've probably sold the book based on a proposal and sample chapters. So now the author is off writing their book. So, and then for my fiction clients who have multiple books, this isn't their first contract. So they're writing their books that are under contract. So sometimes there's times when the author is like, oh, I'm not going to make my deadline. That's when they call their agent, right? Like I'm the one that gets to have that conversation with the publisher. And then once the book is written and turned in, and then the author is going through the editorial process with their editor, then eventually the marketing is going to kick in. And so we're going to have a marketing call with the publisher, and that's going to be the marketing team, then the PR team, and the author and the agent. And I'm going to be on there so that I can help the author understand what's going on, and so that I know what's going on with the marketing, and I can advise the client if there are things they need to ask about, things they need to add to the marketing plan, and just to help them understand what's going on with marketing. And then there are always times when the publisher is working on the title, and the publisher might come to the author and give them a title that the author doesn't like. And then the author's like, I don't like this title that they're telling me. And so it's the agent that steps in and starts to kind of have that negotiation process. Like, hey, let's talk about this title. Same thing with cover art. The author, a lot of times, they don't they don't exactly know how to advocate for themselves, and they also don't want to mess up their relationship with the publisher. So the agent is always able to step in and say, hey, we want to work on some other options for covers, and I know how to talk to them about that. So we're kind of like really involved the whole way through. And then once we're at release or just after release, usually sometime before book release, I'm already talking to the author about the next book, and we're starting to work on that together. So yeah, we're there all the way through.
That's good. I didn't know all that. So that's actually really helpful. And then to that point, how often are you looking for just an author? Like, say, for example, I know that there's a book coming out by Allen Iverson, which if you people that have known Allen Iverson know how important he was to basketball and culture. How often are you kind of seeking out authors and saying, hey, I really would love for you to write a book, even if they don't have a book out yet, versus kind of the other side where you are probably getting a lot of inbound traffic of people always like kind of asking you to represent them. I'm curious of like from that standpoint, how do you think about that?
Well, okay, so first, I just want to say my job is not looking for new authors to represent. My job is working with the authors that I already represent, helping them get their projects ready for submission, handling the entire submission process, fielding offers, negotiating deals, and being there for whatever they need. And that takes 90 to 100% of my day. So looking for new clients, meaning reading query letters and proactively reaching out to people I'd like to represent, is extra work that usually takes place outside of my regular working hours. But to answer your question, most of our new clients do come from queries, but all of us, meaning all the agents in my agency, we are always in the process of reaching out to people proactively, who we would like to work with, and asking people like, hey, I've been watching you on social media, are you thinking of writing a book? And so there's a few of those.
No, I was just gonna ask. I remember you had worked in Hollywood, I believe, as a screenwriter at one point as well. When it comes to those sides of things, when you're negotiating with publishers, when it comes to IP and film rights, is that what you all work with as well when you're helping them with their final deal with the publisher?
Yeah, every agency has their own way of handling this. Some agencies have in-house subrights people who do that directly, and that's usually the big literary agencies. Many of us work with co-agents. So we work with co-agents who specialize in pitching to Hollywood, and then we work with other co-agents who specialize in selling foreign rights. So our agency has ways of handling those subrights by working with our co-agents.
Okay, and to the point where you're talking about how you help the author all the way through the journey, even after they do their release and everything in between there. Do literary agents like earn royalty for the long-term success of the book? Like I'm thinking maybe like a Atomic Habit where it's been on the New York Times sellers forever. Is the literary agent also negotiating long-term, or are you only kind of helping at the part where the initial publishing deal, or I guess are they worked into the long-term success of a book?
Agents receive their 15% commission on all revenue from a book deal, including advances, ongoing royalties, and all subrights sales. So it continues as long as that book contract remains active.
Oh, that's awesome. And then is it necessary, I guess, for an author to have a lawyer look over their deal? Like if they're working with a literary agent or a publisher, does it make sense to also get a lawyer to say, hey, I'm thinking about working with this literary agency or this publisher? Does it make sense to also have a lawyer kind of in between that part as well?
One advantage of having an agent is that you don't need to pay an attorney. You're already paying the agent to review and negotiate your contracts. Most attorneys don't understand the details of how publishing works. They understand the law and they understand the legalese, but they don't understand the ins and outs of how the publishing business works. So they are not going to be able to improve a publishing contract. Literary agents understand the nitty-gritty of the publishing contract, what to look for, what's fair, and how to protect their authors' interests. So I have had authors hire attorneys to review their publishing contracts. And what ends up happening is they pay their attorney hundreds of dollars, but the attorney doesn't make any meaningful changes to the contract. Of course, they do suggest changes because they're being paid by the hour and they want to give their client the best service. But by the time the attorney sees the contract, I've already negotiated everything possible and made sure that the author's rights are protected. So paying the attorney is basically a waste of money because you don't need to pay two people to do the same job.
Yeah, that makes sense. And can we shift a little bit to the writer side? I know as I was kind of mentioning earlier, the query letter, it's just a lot. I know a lot of authors, you see them all the time on whether it's, I guess, Twitter or any of those writing places where there's like I've gotten rejected over and over again, and this letter is so difficult. So you've seen so many of these letters come across your desk. I'm curious to like, what does a good one look like? What are some big like do's or don'ts, or I guess even like instant declines maybe that authors should look for, or when they're writing their query letters?
Um, a successful query avoids wasting words and kind of gets to the important stuff right away. So in fiction, that query doesn't spend time talking about the theme or the world of the book. It gets straight to the heart of the story. What's the conflict? What's the goal? What are the stakes? It really gets to the heart of what is this story about. You don't need to spend a lot of time talking about the theme or the world, because if you get straight to the heart of the story and you tell me about the goals and the stakes and the conflict, I am going to understand the theme because of the way that you pitched it. You don't have to talk about the theme. A nonfiction query, again, gets straight to the main point. What is the felt need that is going to drive readers to this book? What is the big question that this book answers? And a nonfiction query also has to do a good job of, in as few words as possible, selling the author as the right author for this nonfiction book. What are your credentials? Are you already a trusted voice on this topic and that kind of thing? Because that's really important to sell a nonfiction book. So you're kind of just wanting to pay attention to getting straight to the important things about your book. The instant declines are always just for genres that we don't represent because people didn't look at, what we say we represent, or word counts that we can't sell. That's usually what it is. I would say the biggest reason for declines is simply because we have so many queries and we can only say yes to so many, and we have to find something that just grabs us and kind of immediately makes us go, oh, I think I might be able to sell this. But keep in mind, it's really rare to have a situation where the agent is only looking at your query letter, because almost all agents are either using Query Manager, which allows you to paste in tons of material into there. Like, we're reading a lot in there, and you can have whole chapters in there. Or agents are asking for the query plus paste in your first 5 or 10 pages. And so almost everybody is giving you the opportunity to give more than just that perfectly written query letter.
That makes sense. And so we talk to a lot of founders, and the equivalent of this process for founders would be like going to get venture capital, where you're putting out a pitch deck and you're getting feedback on it. Sometimes you don't get feedback and you're trying to figure out, what do I need to do to get to the right venture capitalist to fund my business. And it's similar to what you're kind of saying, like with the instant decline. It's like, if you go to go to one that's not in your industry or specific, or has worked with founders like yourself, you're gonna get that message back very quickly. So I'm curious, like, how should writers process a rejection to their query letters? Because I kind of to that point when I was saying that sometimes you don't get the feedback that you were necessarily looking for, and you're trying to figure out, okay, it didn't work with this agency, but doesn't mean necessarily my book's bad. So should they process it?
Yeah, exactly. And I like your comparison to, looking for funding, because that's the same thing. That's actually what you're doing with a query letter and a book proposal is, you are looking for a business partner to fund the production of this product, right? It's the same thing. So as far as processing rejection of query letters, I recommend that authors consider rejections as simply information, not global information, as in nobody likes my work, but specific. Your work is not right for that agent at that time and nothing more. And remember that a single query rejection doesn't tell you anything useful. You can't start drawing any conclusions until you have dozens of responses. And even then, you do need to work really hard to try to avoid emotional spirals and instead ask questions. Do you think it's the query? Or is the book idea itself simply not grabbing people's attention? You may need to get some feedback from friends or beta readers or a critique partner. You may need to rewrite your query letter and try again. It can be difficult to know, especially if you have a book idea that, when looked at very objectively, people might say like, yeah, I don't know if anyone wants to read a book about that. I doubt you're going to have a friend tell you that. So it can be hard to get, really honest feedback from people But honestly, sometimes that is the problem. It's not that you wrote a terrible query. It's that we don't think anyone's going to want to read a book about this. And I think people have to be more and more and more aware of that when it comes to nonfiction books, because more and more people want to know about a topic. They're going to get it online and they're going to ask ChatGPT to tell them everything about this subject that they want to know about, right? So is it a topic that people are going to pay money on a book to read about? So it's hard to get that information that you need.
Yeah, I figure. And how long should an author walk that path, right? Before they're saying, hey, maybe I should shift to self-publishing. I've reached out to agency after agency. It hasn't worked out for me. How long should they stick with it? Because I think also, to the founder's standpoint, or just to a writer's standpoint, when you believe in something, sometimes you will stick with it for a really long time, in spite of it, because you're like, well, they just don't understand it, but I know it's something that's important. So I'm curious of how long have you seen, I guess, when authors have stayed in this process of trying to get to a traditional publisher?
Right. So you talked about like believing in it and really sticking with it, but sticking with it can play out in various ways. Sticking with it doesn't necessarily mean I'm just going to keep trying and keep sending to more and more agents. Maybe sticking with it means, do I need to hire an editor and go back to the drawing board on my book? And do I need to like really get some advice about how to do this better? So sticking with it can look different ways to different people. But in any case, how long should they stick with it before like deciding to pivot to self-publishing? That is a big question because it's not a simple binary. I believe you should only consider self-publishing if you think of it as a worthy publishing path and it's something that you are interested in doing, not simply as a backup plan if you can't get an agent and a publisher fast enough to suit you. I don't know that you're going to have a satisfactory publishing experience if that's the way you're thinking about it. Consider self-publishing if you're ready to become a small business owner and devote yourself to marketing and selling that book. But don't do it if your plan is to throw it up on Amazon and walk away. If you think your book is good enough that you expected a large publisher to support it, and you're going to pivot to self-publishing, then you need to support it too. It means like you're going to have to do the work of the marketing and the selling and sticking by it and supporting that book. If you've been querying a while with no success, there are other options besides immediately saying, well, I'm just going to self-publish. The smartest move is often to set that book aside and write another one, and another one, and another one if necessary, because that's how you get better and better. You become a better writer and eventually have a better chance of finding the success that you want. Now, for some people, they're excited about self-publishing, in which case, go for it, And I work with a lot of people who are very successful self-published authors, and we are also doing some traditional publishing deals for them. So it's a great path, but I would advise you to try not to approach it as like, well, if I can't sell it, then I'll self-publish. It's like, okay, there's these two paths. I'm going to try this one first for a certain amount of time and maybe set, a deadline for yourself. Like if I don't get any bites after a year, then I'm going to, pivot to self-publishing. That's that's good, but try to approach it, very seriously and professionally, because if you're going to go to self-publishing, you're going to be a small business owner now, and you're going to be responsible for every part of this business.
No, I love your perspective on that because we have talked to different people like David Chesson, who does like Kindle Entrepreneur. And the key part, like you're saying, is when you do the self-publishing route, you have taken on a entrepreneurial mindset that you have to do because now he talked about from day one, you got to do your marketing on the book. Like when you're in the process of writing it, then as you're saying, you got to make sure when you put it on Amazon, you're not just picking it, putting it up there and just throwing it. You have to make sure you're hitting the right categories, marketing it, getting into the right conversations, going on podcasts. You become your own basically island of promoting your book, where as we've kind of seen with traditional publishing, you have the chance to have your book on the bookshelves. They'll do something, help you with some of your marketing, some of your book tours. It becomes a whole different process. I do want to talk a little bit about this. It's kind of the age old question, but I think it's important for people when it comes to writing, when it comes to their manuscript and they're submitting it to agencies. Does it need to be a complete piece of a book? Can they do partial, or how should they process when they are ready to write their letter?
Okay, it's standard in the industry that first time novelists, so that's fiction authors, need a manuscript that's completed, revised, edited, and polished to a shine. So if you have a novel, it needs to be done and ready to go before you start submitting. For nonfiction authors, they need to have completed a full book proposal and 3 sample chapters. The book proposal does include an outline of the whole book, so it shows that you've thought through what this whole book looks like. So that's a book proposal and sample chapters for nonfiction. We rarely work outside of these standards because this is what we need to understand your book and be able to sell it to a publisher. And also keep in mind these are guidelines for first-time authors. So if you are doing repeat work with your agent, it's going to be different.
Yeah, rather funny question, but I see it so much on Amazon because I read a lot of nonfiction. So sometimes I'll look up some random founder that's hopefully has written a book, or I want to learn some more information about them. And you have just seen an influx of these AI books that you look and you're like, you can tell by the cover 9 times out of 10. But I'm curious, have you seen a influx of more letters and manuscripts being sent that are AI? And I guess how do you all detect it, and just your overall thought about that?
So we have not seen a lot of that coming specifically to us yet. I know it's possible, and I know it will be increasing, but I also feel like you said, most of the people who are using AI, they're not coming to agents. They're self-publishing. They're, especially if there's a lot of people that are putting fully AI written books up on to Amazon and all that. They're doing that on their own. They are not coming to us. And most people do understand that if they are seeking an agent, if they're going to be working with an agent, then their work is going to be under, very serious scrutiny. Like they're going to be working with their agent on all the editing and everything. And so if using AI for their writing and editing is something that they're doing and maybe don't want people to know, they're not going to probably want to work with an agent.
Yeah, that makes sense. I want to get a little bit into like the author, just how they might think about navigating things. For some, say, let's say like a successful self-published author, they've had a lot of success pushing their books out themselves, but they're more curious and finally taking the approach to a traditional publisher. What is your advice there for them? How should they kind of navigate that when they've had a lot of success where they've been able to do really well on their own?
So it's an entirely personal decision. Everyone has their own reasons for wanting to publish with an established publisher, and many authors still pursue this path even after successful self-publishing. My honest answer to this question is you should consider it if and when you want to. There are a lot of people, so there are some people who just like writing books is kind of a business decision and they're going to do it in whatever way that works. But there are other people who have maybe kind of dreamed about being a writer since they were young, and they always had this vision of working with a big publisher. So even if they were able to create a successful self-publishing business, they still have that dream of working with a publisher. There's nothing wrong with that. And so if you do have a successful track record with a number of self-pub titles, that will help your chances of getting an agent and a publisher. And many people will continue with their self-publishing even while also working with a publisher on some of their books. So it's very common for people to go back and forth or to be doing both. It's kind of wide open. Everyone has their own path.
Yeah, it makes sense. And we talk to a lot of creators on our Creator Talks podcast that they're book influencers now, but now they're like, hey, I want to jump into writing a book, and or at least they'll say, I've always wanted to write a book. I'm in the process of it. But they've built a really strong audience. So I'm curious when it comes to authors that haven't built audience, like how important is that? Should they be building their audience as early as possible before they come to a literary agent, or how does that play into it, or does it matter?
So if you are thinking of yourself as a nonfiction author, then yes, because you have a nonfiction topic and that's your brand. So it does make sense. If you're a fiction author, you are a novelist, then no, you do not need to start by building an online presence. Fiction authors should spend their time learning to write the novel. The bar is very high when it comes to the writing. So work on perfecting your craft and writing a great book. Having an online presence can't hurt at all. And it really may help when it comes to getting a publisher, and certainly can help when it comes to selling those books. But the most important thing for the foot in the door is the quality of your book. And that means learning how to write a novel. It's different when you're writing nonfiction because you may need to establish yourself as a trusted voice on that topic before you're able to sell that nonfiction book. So building a brand ahead of time makes sense.
Yeah, I'm curious what questions should an author ask their agent to figure out if the agent's the right fit for them? I say that because I think even when whether you're building a house or going into things, you want to kind of vet people as well. I don't think it's always, I know on one hand, you're like, okay, anybody that believes in my work, I want them to go and help me. But I'm curious when it comes to that perspective, what questions should an author be asking a literary agent?
So no matter how many questions you ask or how much research you've done, there's no way to know everything or to predict the future. When you sign with an agent, even if he or she is your dream agent, you're sort of launching yourself into the unknown. But you can do your best to be prepared and informed. So think about the various areas you might want information about when it comes to talking with an agent. Then you can come up with specific questions to ask. So some areas you might want to think about are first, basic information. So what is that agent offering you? Now, I'm assuming that this conversation is happening when an agent is on the phone with you offering representation. So you're first going to want to make sure you understand what are they offering you. What are the terms? Are they offering you a time-limited representation for one book or more books? Is it open-ended? So just make sure you understand what they're offering. Then there are some like legal considerations you might want to understand. Does the agency use a written author-agent agreement? And what happens if either the agent or the author wants to end the relationship? So you might want to understand some of these things. Then you might also want to ask them about the agent's process. So how do they communicate? Do they let you know where and when they submit your work? Which editors and when that happens? Are they going to forward rejection letters or tell you what those rejection letters are? So, and you can think if there's other things that you are interested in about the process, just ask that. Then you're probably going to want to understand about the money. So you'll want to understand the agent's percentage of commission. Does the author receive payments from the agency or from the publisher? And usually the payments come through the agency. So you might want to ask how long after the agent receives advances or royalties will they forward that money to you, and also just find out logistically how they do it. Do they do bank transfers, etc. Then you might want to ask them about career or editorial issues. So if they have looked at your book and that's why they're offering representation, are they able to tell you how close is your book to being ready for submission? Will there be a lot of editing and rewriting first? And approximately how long do they think that might take? And, bigger picture would be, does the agent help with career planning beyond this one book? So those are just kind of some ideas of areas you can be thinking about in terms of the kinds of questions to ask.
No, I love that, and I think it's so important for authors just to be aware of kind of what they can do and what's possible for them. And speaking of that, I do want to ask, when it comes to persistence, I know we talked about it a little bit, but I am curious, like, when have you, or even authors maybe you've worked with, where persistence paid off, where they stuck with it long enough? They might not have sold their first book, but eventually broke through as a writer.
I actually have so many situations in which patience and persistence and diligence paid off. I had a fiction author who had a 3-book series, but when we shopped the first book, we couldn't sell it. So she completed the second book in the series. This was fiction. So she completed the second book in the series and changed it a little bit so that it could be the first book in the series. And we did sell that one. And she ended up with a 3-book deal. And the original book that we couldn't sell eventually was edited and rewritten so that it also became part of the series. So it was like we just kind of had to be diligent and keep working on it and keep trying to figure out like how are we going to sell this? And we made it happen. I had another client who was writing nonfiction. She was really smart. Her blogs were incredibly insightful and well written. And but when she was trying to write the book, her chapters ended up just stilted and kind of boring and nothing like her other writing that I had seen. I kept sending her back to the drawing board with the same result. But in talking it through, we uncovered that when she was writing her blogs, she felt very relaxed, like she was talking to her friends, and she just wrote what came to her. But when she was working on her book, she had this feeling that she had to be different and more serious because this was a book, very different from the relaxed writing in her blogs. So we worked out a way that she could sit down and tell herself that she was writing a blog post today rather than a book chapter. And that worked. She ended up writing the whole book that way. We had been working on it for so long, it kind of took forever to get here, but she ended up writing the whole book this way. It did get picked up by a Big 5 publisher and eventually made it on the New York Times bestseller list. So all that work paid off.
See, I love those stories because it's so important. And it's a part of the journey when you're writing a story or want to bring something to life. You have to stick in it sometimes. I know we were talking about when to shift or not, but sometimes just being persistent makes all the difference.
It can be really hard, especially when your agent is saying these chapters aren't working, and your agent is going to be honest with you because they need to be able to sell the book to the publisher and they're not going to submit anything that they don't think is ready. So we have to kind of give that hard news like, okay, we need to keep working on this because I don't think it's working right now. So it can be difficult to work through all of that, to get that kind of feedback and have, the motivation to keep going. But that's when, your belief in what you're doing really takes over and, you stick with it and hopefully can find the success you're looking for.
Yeah, I want to get into some of your reading taste and some of the things you've been into. I guess one last question for authors that are listening. After the literary agent passes it off to the publisher, what does that process look like? Or what should the author be doing maybe in that phase in between when they finally got their agent Now they're in the process of maybe, I don't know if they've had their book announced yet, but they're somewhere in that. What does that process look like for them so they can understand the like behind the scenes on that?
Yeah. So one thing that's hard for authors in this part of the process is that it can be very quiet all of a sudden, especially if they've been going back and forth with their agent a lot as the agent has been trying to sell the book to a publisher. And so there's been a lot of communication, a lot of things have been happening. Maybe we've been having Zoom calls with publishers, or whatever. So finally we get it sold. And now all of a sudden it's dead silence. And the author's kind of like, oh, this is a little scary. So then a lot of times, so if you are with a big five publisher, at that point, it can take a month to 6 weeks before we even get the contract. So during that time, if you're an anxious person, you are writing your agent every other day going, have we gotten the contract yet? Do you think they're going to cancel the book? We don't even have a contract yet. And do you think they changed their mind? Because the big five publishers are so slow. So eventually they will get the agent the contract. So now your agent is reviewing the contract and going back and forth with the publisher on negotiations, and you're still sitting over there going, okay, usually the agent will at least be updating you. Okay, I'm working on the contract. Then eventually the publisher will send it to the author for electronic signing. So now they finally have a signed contract. And then you're either going to be writing the book if it's nonfiction because you don't have a completed manuscript yet, or you're going to be entering into the editorial process. So that means now your editor has it. Now you're waiting for the editor to get back to you with editorial notes. So there's this long period where you're in writing, you're in editing, you are having intermittent communication with your publisher, and your agent is now kind of hanging out over there on the side just for if you need them, but they're not necessarily going to be reaching out because you're kind of in the publisher's hands now, but your agent is just there if you need them. So you're going through the process. Your editor is now your main contact, and your agent is there if you don't understand what's going on, or you have a question, or you have a problem.
I genuinely always love these conversations because for authors, it feels sometimes like it's isolated. Like you wrote the book and you're trying to figure everything out, but you realize how much of a team is behind making a book get onto the shelves. Like, as you said, you got everything from the literary agent to the line editor, to the copy editor, to the editor, to the publisher, to, the book sellers that want to put your book out there, to finally us as the reader getting the copy. So it's always really cool just to see those publishing days because you see how much work is put into these books to really, for us to really see these stories in full.
Yeah, and I've worked with so many authors, and after I had been doing it for a while, and I saw how kind of confusing it could be for authors, because there's this long period of time. It's usually a year and a half, where their book is at the publisher, but their book has not released yet. And there's long periods of silence. There's long periods of not hearing anything. So I actually created a whole 1 hour workshop where I teach people, here is what's going on at your publishing house during that whole year when you feel like you're just sitting there all alone. Here are all the things the publisher is working on your book at all these different stages. And you see that, just like you said, there's so many people there who are working specifically on your book. They're working on the title, they're working on the cover art, they're working on the marketing materials. They're getting everything done. And meanwhile, you're sitting at home going, I'm just all alone here. But there's a lot of people working on your book.
Yeah, thank you for also mentioning your coaching program. I was going to ask, like, what kind of inspired the coaching program? What do you kind of focus on for authors, and how can authors, if they've enjoyed this conversation, figure out how to potentially work with you on that if you're still doing it as well?
People can reach out to me through my website. There's a contact form on there, so you can just write to me. I started offering coaching a few years ago just because, like, I've been on social media for a long time. I used to blog, so I've been just online with authors for years and years. And I see the questions that come in. I see the issues that they're having. I also see how much they could get past their obstacles or get unstuck just by having literally one conversation with a publishing professional who can look at what they've got in front of them and say, okay, here's where you are, or here's what you should do, or here's what I think about your project, or here's why I don't think anyone is responding positively to your query. Like, just a lot of times, just one conversation with somebody who can diagnose and help you figure out where to go from here can be very much of a game changer for people. So every once in a while, I open up to coaching so that I can offer that to a few people.
I love to hear it. Let's talk about your books. What's the last book you read? What are you reading now? And what do you plan to read next?
So I just love to read, front list fiction, hardcover bestseller fiction. So I just finished reading Culpability by Bruce Holsinger,
Okay.
which is just a fascinating novel that actually deals with AI. And the title is Culpability, and so it really digs into issues of who is culpable for a mistake when AI is involved. And you start thinking about it in all these different areas of life, and it's a really big question. So it's a really fascinating book. I'm reading The Correspondent by Virginia Evans, which is absolutely such an amazing book. I love it so much. And I have a very long TBR, but I think next I'm going to read Broken Country by Claire Leslie Hall.
That's cool. And then what stories do you look for, like when you're just reading on your personal time? Like what books do you tend to enjoy?
Yeah, I am one of those people that I just love to read what's new and what's buzzy, because I kind of just want to always stay up on what's going on in the industry and what's the latest and what are people liking. I don't tend to gravitate towards the genres, and I never have. So I'm not a fantasy or a romantasy reader. So even though that's a really big thing, I will typically pick up the really big books in those genres, and I will read 2 or 3 chapters just so I can get a feel for what's going on there. But that's not going to be my personal choice for my leisure reading.
No, that makes sense. Opposite industry, but one of my favorite people was Quincy Jones, and he talked about how he'd always go and listen to the top 20 records that came out on any given week just to continue to improve his taste and see what the world is reacting to at any given moment. So what you just said
Yes.
kind of is the same thing. As we wrap up, the question I always like to ask, I think it should be really fun seeing as you've been in this space for so long. But what would you like to see more of in the book world?
I'd like to see publishers taking more chances on incredible debut authors, people who are fantastic writers and storytellers, even if they are not writing the latest trendy trope or genre. I really want that to continue, and I would like to see more of it. I'd also like to continue to see readers and influencers using social media to talk about the books that they're reading. And I'd love to see more community being built around books and reading. I really do love all of the reading content that I now see online. It's really fun.
I love to hear, and that's hopefully what we continue to do at Bookum. And on the other side, what would you like to see less of in the book world? Could be different, and you can kind of take it how you like.
I think I'd be okay with less drama, especially in the social media world.
Oh wow.
But
I think
other
we
than
all
that, I'm good.
I said we can all agree on that. Thank you so much, Rachelle. It's truly been an honor just again for all the energy and time and coaching and everything you do for authors. We truly appreciate it. Please let us know where we can find you on the internet or anything that's coming up, any books that are maybe coming out of what you all are doing. I would love for us to support in any way.
All right. Well, you can find the agency at RachelleGardner.com. And like I said, there's a contact form on there. We also have lots and lots of articles for writers and people pursuing publishing. And we have our books that have, as they're releasing, we put them onto our book page there. So lots of stuff there.
Love to hear it. We'll make sure to put that all in the comments below. Thank you so much, Rachelle, and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you, Kyle.